Okay. All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Know Who Drives Return, the podcast brought to you by Boardroom Alpha. I'm David Drapkin. First off, I just want to introduce our new co-host, Joanna. Joanna joins us with over 20 years of experience covering stocks on Wall Street. She should bring some actual expertise to the show, if you will. So, Joanna, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, psyched to be here.
And second, for the real introduction, we're delighted to be joined today by Blair LaCorte. Blair LaCorte's the CEO of AEye. AEye went public in August of last year when it completed a SPAC transaction with a Cantor Fitzgerald SPAC, CF Finance Acquisition Corp. 3. And so Blair joins us today to talk LiDAR, autonomous driving, and much more. So Blair, first of all, thanks for you for joining us today.
No, listen, thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So how about to kick off, first off, why don't you give us a little introduction to yourself, and then if you to follow up on that, how LiDAR fits into the whole technology space as a whole.
Sure. I listen. I think at the highest level, I would say I'm a recovering Luddite and an aspiring Buddhist, and what I mean by that is I've been in the technology implementation business my entire life, but the value I bring is not that I'm an engineer. It's that I love working with engineers and I love finding applied technology. So I actually am slightly skeptical every time I do look at a new technology. And the first question I like to ask is, how is this going to affect people? How is it going to be applied? And how is it going to make people's world better? And I think that is going to have a direct impact on the subject we're talking about later, which is when you add a new technology like LiDAR, what does it do to your car and how are you going to experience that?
So when we think about the space as a whole, LiDAR, it seems to be in two primary applications. On one hand, you're talking about automotive safety and how LiDAR and the intensified seeing technology of LiDAR can help car safety. And then you also have this movement towards truly autonomous driving. And companies in this space seem to have kind of different messaging with respect to what's real and the timing of each of those features and functionality. How does AI think about the space, and what do you see in the near term as the primary applications for LiDAR?
Sure. And I think as also a past investor, I think sometimes it takes a little bit of a step back to put those two things in context, because I think you hit it right on the head. This is the application of sensing technology. Now, sensing technology has been applied, for over 100 years into mechanical objects. You can take a look at the radar and sonar coming out of World War II. You can take the GPS sensing technology within 10 meters in RFID coming out of Desert Storm. And you can take a look at a lot of the satellite backhauls and things like that, the sensing technologies that allow you to look at larger global maps. We've been applying these to mechanical objects for a while. LiDAR is the next natural step in that process. And what I would say to you is when you look at the automotive industry, it is always one of the top 3 industries that is an innovator and that applies technology faster. And that has been shown in sensing technology. When you take a look at it now, the use of radar and cameras in cars is unsurpassed. And in fact, they've increased the reliability and driven down the cost significantly to the point where it's been applied to almost every other industry in the world. So what I would say first is that at the end of the day, car companies don't ask themselves, do I want LiDAR? They're not in love with LiDAR. They don't want to put LiDAR in their cars. What they ask themselves is the question you asked, which is, how do I increase safety so that I can sell more cars and make people feel better about the cars they buy? And secondarily, I would break up autonomy into, how do I add a new feature that someone will pay for? So let me give you 2 examples that are out in the market today around ADAS. One is GM Super Cruise program. They don't use LiDAR at all, although they do use LiDAR maps, but it has been one of the most successful add-on features to a car because for $5,000, they've got 62% uptake rate. So when you look at the average that's made on a car today is $3,500, that is a significant value add to a consumer and therefore also a value add to a car maker. Tesla, on the other hand, charges a little bit more, to $8,000 to $9,000 with a 33% uptake rate. So the way I would think about this is every car maker in the world is thinking about, to your point, do I want to add in something for safety so I can have redundancy and increase the capabilities of my car as it stands today? And or do I want to add a completely new feature? I don't think those two are mutually exclusive, which is why I will tell you that almost every car out there today already is starting to implement autonomy, whether it's automatic braking or something higher.
And how far do you think autonomy goes? Like, is there some dystopian future where it's truly hands-off, eyes-off driving? I mean, do you see that as a pragmatic reality over time? I mean, how do you see this industry evolving?
So again, it really becomes down to there's two different markets for this type of technology, right? And I sometimes I think we get because we relate to the consumer piece of it, we get really focused on that. One is, what type of technology will you have in your car and how much autonomy will you want? Will, for instance, you just want automatic braking? Will you want autonomy when you're on the highway? Will you want autonomy 90% of the time? Or to your point, will I want my car to drive me? And you will make a decision on that with a cost versus benefit analysis. Clearly, if they gave you the ability for your car to drive by itself for no extra cost, you would say, I'll use it when I want to and I'll not use it when I want to. That's not the case today. The cost benefit isn't there. The other side is B2B. So if you already own an asset, for instance, a mining vehicle, an agricultural vehicle, or a city owns a stoplight, and I can put something that senses on top of that, that makes that vehicle or that stoplight smarter, safer, and actually helps me to make money. So for instance, in a mining vehicle, the second you hit something, you have to do a safety review. It takes you down for a day. It could cost you $40, $50 million in throughput. That's got nothing to do with what you and I would say about our consumer car, but big reason that you'd want to add technology in. So today I would tell you that the pitch went out, and it went out over the last 10 years that robo-taxis are here. Would you like to be in a robo-taxi? And most of the fight was over how quickly would it be done, would the regulations support it? And in fact, by estimates, this is good news, probably $50 billion was spent over the last 10 years in technology companies trying to solve that problem for a consumer. Can I drive your car? The conclusion that the market actually came to was, we're not ready for it. It's too expensive, but it does work. And so what you're seeing is the autonomy that you thought you'd get in a robo-taxi, you're seeing is rolling out in your car in pieces, right? Which is you're getting pieces of autonomy that you can either get free or that you're going to buy. Now, in the industrial space, it's a different story. They're moving ahead faster on full autonomy. But in the consumer space, we will make cars smarter to the point where it only takes a little bit more to make it fully autonomous. And if the cost is there, people will do it.
Yeah, I do want to touch on cost because I think a lot of industry participants say that cost is the primary limiting factor on adoption of LiDAR right now. People say, the form factor is too clunky, the prices need to come down. And within that, there's a big debate on which wavelength technology offers the best cost, performance, all of the features. So I wanted to get your take on where the industry is and how.
No, that's 100% on to the point I had before, which was, look, the first question is, can it add value? The second question is swap, size, weight, power, and cost. And so what you find, and you've seen this happen over and over again with radar, it took radar 15 years to actually drop the cost to the point it had mass deployment. Now you take a look at cameras, about 11 years. My estimate is that we'll get LiDAR to that level within 5 years, and it's already begun. In fact, if you take a look at the what drives the cost of hardware down, there's three main components. Simple system design, right? Which takes experience to figure out what you need. The second is material cost. Can I get the sub components cheaper? And the third is volume, right? And that's the piece that's been missing from LiDAR that's just starting to hit. 80% of cost reductions end up happening in volume. So what you're seeing now with a set of LiDAR companies going public, a set of supply chains gearing up, and a set of OEMs ready to accept the technology in some number, you're seeing the volume projections go up, and therefore the costs go down for actually building the hardware component. Now, I'm going to make another bold statement. First is, that car companies don't want LiDAR, they want value, and they'll take it if it provides value. The second is that I think that hardware is going to commoditize very, very quickly in this space. And the reason I say that is because it's not the first sensor in town. You have, and a lot of people don't understand until I say it, and then they say that's too simple. But when you look at it, radar guesses. Now, we have great software behind radar to say it bounced off that, it hit metal. I wonder what's out there. So it has some great attributes like long distance, weather capability, but it has a very difficult time with precise density of what is out there. If you look at cameras, they get a lot of density, every pixel, evenly spread out on a screen, but they don't get much distance. They have problems because they don't have their own light source, so they can be blinded. So great density, not great distance. So they both guess. That's why when you take a look at the first Tesla implementation, they had both radar and camera, theory being, well, if I put both of them in, I've had a two standard deviation capability if they both agree that I'm really seeing what I'm seeing. Unintended consequence, when one of them disagrees because of their weakness, the car does nothing. So when you look at a lot of the challenges that the Teslas had, great auto assist system, but in sunlight at high speeds from small objects and metal and lateral entry, there's always a chance that the camera and the radar will actually disagree, which is why they're going back to a single sensor. My point being that at the end of the day, sensors are a system, and the system is going to drive down the cost because you'll use cameras, radar, and LiDAR in the best implementations. And you've already seen that start. LiDAR component costs are down 90% over the last 5 years. Now, remember, they started with putting $250,000 worth of sensors on top of a car, and then McKinsey having a study that said, don't worry, if you run the car 24 hours a day, it's only 75 cents a mile. That obviously didn't work with consumers, but that's what's happening now.
And is this $500, is that the bogey that everyone's trying to get to? You see that number thrown out a lot as like, that's got to be the cost for volume production.
Right. Well, I think, look, again, you have to listen to your customer. Like my dad would always say, they're not a partner and they're not a customer unless you know how they make money, right? It's always easy to tell them how great you are, but you have to understand how they make money. So where's that $500 number coming from? It's coming from a car company saying, if I'm going to add a safety feature in that actually makes my car better, but doesn't add necessarily an upgraded feature, I'm going to need something low enough that I can still mark it up so I can stay alive and that the consumer can still actually absorb that into the price of the car. Now, if you're going to add a completely new feature, that's $5,000. The rule of thumb is, well, I need to make my hardware piece $1,000 to $1,500. So in some senses, this is aspirational. The car companies are pointing to like Babe Ruth and saying, look what happened to radar. Look what happened to cameras. They're both very, very inexpensive. I need you to get there faster. In some ways, they're actually playing Moneyball. They're looking at all the statistics and saying, here's what I can really afford. If you can do this for me, I can make money and provide great value to my consumer. So do I believe that LiDAR systems can be under $500? They are today. The question again is, there's many different types of LiDAR systems. LiDAR was invented in 1960, so don't let anyone fool you that this is a new kind of thing. It was invented, I believe, for the Mark II long distance targeting system. So every time you see TV and you see a little red dot on someone, that's because a LiDAR is deterministic. Unlike cameras and radar, it doesn't guess. It has its own light source, and it is absolutely can tell you the distance, and with multiple shots can tell you the 3D density of an object. That's what makes it valuable. So if you wanted a LiDAR system for $5 today, you can get a targeting system for your gun. Okay, but if you wanted a LiDAR system that's going to actually see small objects at high speeds, which means that you have to have 150 meters of road in between you, that you'll see lateral entry, that you'll see high density so you can acquire an object, that's where we're playing today. So is it correct that the car companies are pointing to that? Absolutely. And what's happening right now is that the LiDAR companies are trying to give a set of functionalities to meet the cost projections, and then we negotiate. Okay. But I think that's a very positive sign in the market.
Yeah. And what do you say? I mean, there's a bifurcation in the industry from a wavelength perspective. You've got the 1550 guys, which, you're a part of, and then you've got the 905 nanometer guys that say that 1550 is simply just too expensive for scale. So
yeah. And I won't take it personally that you're profiling me in 50/50, but look, that's a technologist way of being interesting at a dinner party, okay? Because it really doesn't matter. What we're talking about is when you choose a wavelength. Radar is a very long wavelength. I already told you, radar is superior in a lot of ways because it can go through bad weather. 905 was actually popularized in auto during the DARPA challenge when they had a set of college students who went out and said, create a system that drives a car under 15 miles an hour and that can see 360 degrees. The natural choice for that application would have been the only thing that existed, Velodyne, would have been a 905 spinning system, mechanical system, because 905 is built in silicon, and therefore you would think that it would be cheaper. So there will be 905 systems there, but just like radar, 1550 as an amplifiable wavelength is what we standardized in the military. Now, we did that for a couple reasons. One is I can make it intelligent. Every shot, I can change the energy level, which means every shot I can actually change the distance or the density or the repeat hitting of a target to acquire it, right? If you're going to build a passive system, which is everyone else we compete against has a passive system. So for those of you out there that aren't technology PhDs, a passive system, they put 100 lasers on top of each other and it spins around. Now, they started with 7, then they went to 12, then they went to 32, then they went to 100. They did that because the 905 systems are very good at short distance, but couldn't get enough power at longer distances, so they tried to make up for it. Or it goes back and forth like a 1950s robot in a raster, or it flashes like a camera and comes back. Each of those implementations are going to be useful in the future, and each of them have their place. But when you look at high performance systems, there are no systems that we know of today that can get high performance, which means high speed and high distance, small objects, unless you go to a wavelength where you can focus the energy. So what I'm saying is that we're not wavelength agnostic. And in fact, our system is software based and modular, so I can put any kind of laser in it. And in fact, we look at that all the time. But if you're looking at highway autopilot or hub-to-hub trucking, you're going to want high performance. And that is 1550 today.
Yeah. If you think about this industry right now, it feels like there's at least a dozen or more LiDAR companies, and there's really a handful of car manufacturers. So do you see a shakeout? Do you see automotive companies bringing LiDAR in-house? What does this industry ultimately, look like?
You have to be very, my dad would also say, be very careful about predicting the future. You're going to be wrong. But I can tell you the vision. And I think the vision is based on patterns we've seen through other technology. I've been fortunate enough. I was with Sun during the hardware growth, and I was with Autodesk, one of the largest software companies, during software growth. I was in the database business during the database growth, and I also took a networking company public. So what I would tell you is that when you take a look at what's happening today, it's a pattern. You tend to, in high growth technology businesses, get a lot of companies investing early on. So let me give you some perspective. As of 4 years ago, we had 85 known companies that had been funded at significant amounts of money, okay, to figure out what to do with LiDAR, not just for automotive, but for other industries. Today, you probably, depending on how you want to look at it, have somewhere between 6 and 10 companies, some with more money than others, some with technology, but that's also bifurcated. So when you take a look at the markets they focus on, there's today in the public sector, public markets for automotive, there's only 4 companies that are predominantly focused or have a large win like we do with Continental in the business. And there's 4 companies that are primarily focused and have some kind of win in industrial, right? So we're in that sense, I don't think it's as crowded as it seems, but I would tell you that the patterns indicate that you will see, some level of consolidation over the next couple of years and some level of separation. Today in the stock market, you saw the first round, which always happens, prices go up. You've now seen when the NASDAQ and auto tech got hit, was down 60%. LiDAR was down. All of the LiDAR companies were down 75 to 80%. And you see them all trading literally within $50 million valuations when you optimize for cash balances. So what I would tell you as an investor is now is the time to take a look at who you think will separate from the pack, because this is a natural pattern that we see. All of them are funded for the next couple of years. So you can, that's not the risk. The risk is, will you pick something that has the right business model, the right technology, and ultimately the right management team? Because we tend to forget that at the end of the day, you brought it up, this is about adoption. No one has invented something that is unbelievably different in base LiDAR. What you're seeing is different system implications. And you saw this with Fairchild when they focused on speeds and feeds, and Intel disrupted the market by putting system on a chip, and NVIDIA verticalized it for automotive. When you take a look, and I would be amiss if I didn't, because my head of marketing would yell at me. When you take a look at us versus other people, we've just taken a very different approach. We've assumed that hardware will commoditize, so we haven't based our business on hardware. When you look at our projections, we are software driven and modular, so we can use the global supply chain for any innovation, and innovation is happening at a massive rate in the LiDAR business today. And our business model is extremely different than our peers. We don't sell direct into automotive. We sell through large tier ones who already have automotive customers, and we license our software and our hardware, and then we give them hardware design that they can improve. In the industrial markets, we do sell direct, and we put a lot more software in it, but we also sell in conjunction with systems integrators. So you have a choice now. You have a choice between people who are focused on auto only, industrial only. We're the only company that's secular. We're focused on both. You have a choice between high performance and lower performance systems with lower wavelength. And you have a decision to make on business model. Do you go with someone who's going to sell direct only, or someone who sells direct and through partners? And that's our pitch, is that over the next year, I think there'll be a separation in the market based on fundamentals. Who is giving customers what they need and the way that they need it?
Right. So if I could jump in here, I had a question. Just, I know public markets can be fickle, but it seemed like last year LiDAR was an extremely hot space. A lot of hype around it, particularly in the SPAC market. Given all the companies that chose that route. And you just spoke about it in your last answer, given some of the negative, at least public market performance that you've seen in your stock and others. Sort of what would you say to investors that may think, was it too early? Is it too early for me to look at your stock, given where it's at today? And was it too early, for many of these companies to hit the public markets right away?
Yeah, to quote a classic movie, Trading Places, I would say, buy, Mortimer, buy. I'm just kidding. Look, what I would say is that this is a natural cycle for large TAM potential markets in high technology. And so one of the questions you have to ask is, why did all of the companies in the auto tech space for sensing use a SPAC versus using a traditional IPO or staying private? And the reason can be said in one word: Tesla. If you take a look at verticalization of sensing technology, and you take how long it takes, it took Tesla 7 years to get there. You need to have a source of funding that actually creates hardware, that creates a hardware design, and then allows you to build software on top of it. So SPACs will give you a 3 to 5 year range. That said, we believe in the first 2 years, which we went public, last August, but others went public earlier. In the next, in the next year and a half, you will see the winners actually emerge, because we're far enough along. Most of us have been at it for over 8 years. So SPACs were a natural tendency. And, did we get whipsawed when NASDAQ went down and auto tech went down? For sure we did. But our strategy has been to continue to execute and add value and give transparency to our investors. We think this is a great time, if you're going to make a bet, that sensing technology and LiDAR will be a part of not only cars, but everything else out there, like cameras and radar. You're at the tip of the spear.
But to David's point, it feels a little bit like chicken and egg. You can't get the cost down until you get to volume production, and you can't get to the volume production until you're tightly integrated with the car manufacturer and what they want precisely. So, I mean, it feels like, to some extent, that many of these companies are a year or so away from, meaningful revenue generation.
Well, remember, you have to separate revenue in the car business, because what's happening today, and there was an article on Bloomberg today talked about it. We've already had 17 car companies commit to short-range LiDAR already. And what I can tell you, and all of my peers have said the same thing, is we're involved in another 18 RFQs for long-range LiDAR. So in essence, the train has left. When you start the RFQ process, it takes you a couple of years to do functional safety testing because it's a consumer product, but the train has already left. LiDAR is happening in automotive. Now, I also believe that the prices have dropped significantly in all the other markets. People don't like to talk about the markets because they're not as sexy and they're not auto tech. But if you take a look at intelligent cities, or you take a look at trucking, or you take a look at agriculture, or you take a look at mining, or you take a look at rail, these are all industries that are high margin sales, maybe not as sexy as a consumer car, but much, much higher margin. In fact, when you take a look at a bunch of the studies done by the analysts, it is a classic. Even though the volumes will be higher in automotive, the profitability for LiDAR companies will probably be greater in the industrial markets because of the margins. Now, we actually are playing in both. So we like the fact that it's low margin, but drives the cost of the components down, because as I believe we are the only company that actually uses the same components in both market. Other companies built separate hardware products for different, for purpose-driven applications. Since we have an adaptable platform, we're the only software-driven platform. Our software just, we customize it, and the hardware is modular, and so it plugs and plays. Now, I believe that there may be someone else who follow our model, and I hope so, because the more people who bring value, the faster the adoption will happen.
And why don't car companies bring LiDAR in-house?
Yeah, it's a make versus buy decision. I mean, how much is it worth to actually control the technology? And when you're a car company, you have a secondary hurdle. If I take it in-house and say I do make it, I can never get the volumes to drive the cost down by myself. I'll have to sell it to everybody else. That's why you see this struggle, even in places like Waymo or Tesla. Should I resell it? Because I can't afford to do it. Most car companies would tell you, when they were telling you the honest truth, they'd say, look, we need a technology out there that's reliable, cost effective, and that has functional safety. And I'm okay in buying the hardware in a place that it drives down the cost because everyone uses it, as long as you let me customize the software so that I can show the value in my car differently than other people can add it. And I'm telling you, that's in their mind's eye. That's the thing about car companies is a lot of people like to characterize them as maybe a little bit slower. The reality is that the car industry has driven more innovation than almost every other industry around. They just have a higher standard of both mass production, which means they have to understand the implications of a global supply chain, and the idea around functional safety. So I have learned a tremendous amount from how those executives think. Now they are being pushed, and the subject you didn't talk about today is they're being pushed hard because the software definable car that they've been looking at this for 10 years, is now reaching the point where they have to play in the EV space, because the conclusion is that the way to build a software definable car is to have a big battery and less moving parts. And so that is a huge thing. I look at it as a massive plus for us, because once you get a software definable car, the first thing you want to do is add in software features. And to your point that you started with, that means safety or autonomy. And so we believe that we will actually benefit greatly by having the capability as a software platform to actually sit on top of these software definable cars. That's our vision.
Yeah. And speaking of the car makers, I mean, no conversation is complete without talking about Elon Musk, who famously speaks quite negatively about LiDAR. So what's your view on that? And, they seem to be promulgating this view that the car is going to be a neural network and that you can do everything via cameras. So I would love to get your take on that.
Well, listen, first of all, every business is going to have a different business model dependent on where they came from. So if you look at a camera first company, like Tesla, who competes against Mobileye, a camera first company, they want camera first. We actually don't think that's a bad thing. We think camera first, LiDAR second, to go back and and add value to it will be a model that exists out there. The second piece is that Elon Musk is a very good business person. He also famously has said at this point in time, and when he's said that, LiDAR has been extremely expensive. He has LiDAR in his rocket today. He knows the value of LiDAR. When LiDAR becomes cost effective for him and his business model, I am sure he will evaluate it. Today, many companies who don't have an existing system are trying to jump to a superior system faster, which means that they're going to LiDAR more aggressively. I believe at the end of the day, anyone who built their system that didn't allow it to be fused with cameras and radar is gone down a blind alley. In fact, we patented not only integration with radar triggers, but we have the patent for bore sighting with cameras so that every laser shot has RGB color so that we can use the cues that the world put out there for humans, even if the computer didn't need the color. It can now use the cues a human would use. So I think that what you're seeing from Tesla is a rollout of the business model. But I don't think if you really listen, that a cost-effective LiDAR system is something that will not be in a Tesla car.
And just a couple of quick ones before you wrap. And so you mentioned earlier, it's about the management team is a huge reason as to who will ultimately win. So notice you made a recent appointment to your board and Sue Ziefman, as well as some other leadership changes at the top. Can you speak a little bit about the new appointments and sort of how your leadership team is set up for success?
Sure. I think listen, it comes down to philosophy. One of the key philosophies that we have as a company is in that, and I foreshadowed this a little bit with the joke of saying I'm a recovering Luddite. I believe that technology needs to be applied. Okay, I love R&D. I love listening to R&D. I love hanging out with R&D people. They're awesome. They are the engine that drives us all. But my job is applying technology. So we have a saying inside our company: I don't have to be right, I have to get it right. Which means if I have a theory, I need to argue it out. And if someone else is right, then you move to who's right and you go faster. And so we built our management team around that philosophy. So if you take a look at it, we've been able to get world-class leaders in our management team outside the technology world and outside the LiDAR world. But we are also, I believe, the only company who has taken senior leaders from all of the other LiDAR companies who have, once they stepped in, looked at what we're doing in our culture, have said, I believe I want to change the world. I believe this is the right way to do it. We have the same philosophy on our board. Now, again, we're going to have a 9-person board. Many people out there who have a lot of experience would have just taken a deep breath right there, because that's very difficult. The downside to a 9-person board globally with COVID is it's very difficult to wrangle them, and you spend a lot of time on it. We're making the bet that in the old Storm and Norman philosophy of we're going to storm, we're going to norm, and then we're going to perform, we're actually bringing in what we believe are extremely talented people, and we're going to have a 9-person board. So you take a look at Carol DeBattista, our head. She was one of the people who helped create the Department of Homeland Security, number 2 at the Air Force, number 2 at the Department of Justice, 4 times public company executive. You take a look at Sue, who just joined, who was head of global marketing production for all of Apple. Before that, for all of Ogilvy. These are world-class people that have one thing in common. When we screen them, they all join our advisory board. In fact, Sue worked for us for 6 months. So all of these people that are on our board have worked inside our company with our people. And then we have actually graduated them to the board to help us. Because again, I don't have to be right, I have to get it right. And as a public company CEO who has investors, part of getting it right is transparency and the ability to drive the stock price and value over time. So while this may be unique, I think, compared to our peers today, I think what you'll see is that over the next year to 2 years, building this type of, I got to be careful not to offend anyone, because my best friend played for the Bears when they crushed my Patriots. But in the Belichick, rule, you have to build a base of players over time that will inspire and bring in younger players who are more talented. And I'm okay with getting more talented people, but I do think we have a culture, a team, and a board that is very attractive, and that's why we've been able to recruit.
Right. Thanks for that. And you get no sympathy in being a Patriots fan. So you've had your success. Let's not let's not go there.
Yeah, remember, I grew up in the years of Grogan. So remember,
Okay.
back then it was not a happy Patriots.
Got it. Cool. And so just to wrap, what ultimately determines who wins? What are the factors that will lead to success in the end? For you guys or in the LiDAR space in general.
So I would say that be wary of people who say it's a winner take all. There will not be one LiDAR company, especially not in automotive, right? A lot of different applications, a lot of different system designs, a lot of different business models. So there will not be one company, and be wary of someone who says that the game is over today. We're in the early stages of a trend that I believe will last 10 to 20 years, and that innovations will happen on top of deterministic sensing that we can't see today. And that's why I'm inspired. And I am happy that the SPAC market allowed us to get enough runway so that we can push this thing through. So as an investor, you have a decision to make, right? You have a decision to make on your time and where your money goes, which is, do I think LiDAR is a secular trend? Just like, networking was or multimedia was. Do I see an opportunity to get in early with a differentiated model and team that will, make my investors money going forward? Or should I wait? And really, that's what it comes down to right now. I'm pushing. I think that you buy when it's low. Mm-hmm. And if I could buy, that I would buy. Although as I've been told many times, I am not allowed to buy. So.
All right. Well, hey, Blair, we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. It'll be very interesting to follow the progress. A lot of exciting stuff going on. So really, thanks for taking the time.
Right. Listen, thanks for having me on. I hope that we, added some thought processes out there and got people thinking. Thank you.
Great.